Okay, so this is my 2019 year in review book reviews, in which I talk about the books I read in 2019, which was actually shockingly few. I'll get to all the reasons why that was in a moment. You wouldn't necessarily know that from watching this channel because I've been posting book reviews fairly regularly, but the vast majority of those are old reviews. So again, a project I started at the end of last year, December of last year, was a project of going through my blog and making videos out of all these book reviews that I did years ago. So if you've been following this YouTube channel and you see all these book reviews popping up, vast majority of those are actually from 10 years ago or more, as I've been slowly working my way through all my old book reviews on the blog. The reasons why I started that project and what I hope to get out of it, I've covered on previous videos, so I'm not going to cover here, other than to say that, perhaps somewhat ironically, one of the reasons I haven't read a lot of books this year is because I've been so busy going back through my old book reviews from previous years. So, you know, like if I have 30 minutes free in the evening, I've quite often used that time to film an old book review instead of reading a new book. So there's a certain irony in that, perhaps. That one of the reasons that my reading list has been so abysmal this year is because I've been going back through my reading list from other years. That's excuse number one. Excuse number two is the new baby, which requires constant attention, yeah, that's taken a big hit in my reading. The other excuse is this past year I've still been working on the Delta. I've been working on Delta Module 3, which I was initially supposed to submit in the spring, but couldn't finish in time, so postponed to the winter. Now, this is something that has to do with the English teaching industry. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a qualification. You've got to write this big report. It's fairly intensive, and it sucked up a lot of my time this year, as well as a fair amount of my reading list. So for the Delta Module 3, I've somewhat tried to align my professional development reading list with the books I needed to read for Delta Module 3. But for Delta Module 3, you're really not supposed to read a lot of books cover to cover. You're supposed to do focused reading on only the sections of the books that you need, which I don't like doing because I like reading a book cover to cover and then adding it to my list of books read list. So for this year, I did teaching young language learners. My specialty was young learners. By Anna Maria Pinter, and then Syllabus Design by David Noonan. And those were two books for professional development that aligned with my reading list for Delta Module 3. But then for the rest of it, I started a lot of books, but then didn't actually finish them. I started like, what was it? I can't remember the full titles now. I started a bunch of books about teaching young learners and syllabus design that I never actually finished because I was jumping around and reading different sections and stuff like that. So those are my legitimate excuses why I haven't done a lot of reading this year. Quasi-legitimate. And the other one is just I've been wasting so much time. Wasting a lot of time scrolling through Twitter, wasting a lot of time on Facebook, wasting a lot of time watching so much junk on YouTube. And I know, like, again, there's a certain... I don't want to complain about that too much because here I am on YouTube now talking about my reading list. But, yes, going forward, I'm going to try and... I say this every year. Every year I say I'm going to cut up all this mindless internet surfing and read more, but again, I'm going to try and do it this year. So anyways, all those excuses out of the way, this is my reading list. Oh, sorry, one more caveat. This is the first time I've done a video of this, but I've been doing this for a few years on the blog. And the way I count it on the blog is from the date the review was posted on the blog. Now, sometimes it takes me a while between when I actually finish a book and when I actually get around to writing the review. In extreme cases, it's actually taken me half a year or more, but quite often it will take me a week. So the first couple ones on this list, I actually finished reading them in 2018, at the tail end of 2018, but posted the review at the beginning in January of 2019. So some of the because I'm doing written reviews and YouTube videos, the YouTube videos might date from the tail end of 2018, but counting them for the 2019 reading list. So Claudius the God by Robert Graves is the first book. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood is book number 2. Teaching Young Language Learners by Anna Marie Pinter is book number 3. Bound for Glory by Woody Guthrie, book number 4. Sweden by Matthew Turner, book number 5. Syllabus Design by David Noonan, book number 6. And that's it. Just 6 books this year. I know, that's pretty bad, huh? I'm going to try and do better next year. Okay, so the best fiction I read, I'm going to go with Sweden by Matthew Turner. I gave it a mixed review, but on the whole I liked it. I mean, granted, there's not a lot of competition this year. It kept me turning the pages while I was reading it. It was immersive enough that you could really get into it, and it was a fascinating view of a really interesting period in Japanese history. The worst fiction of the year, I'm going to go with A Handmaid's Tale. And I'm probably going to get in trouble for this one because I know this is a very beloved book. But for the life of me, I couldn't understand what it was critiquing. I mean, yeah, I get into all this in my book review of it. Like, it's not a, I don't know. I couldn't understand what it was critiquing, and it wasn't fun to read. It was just kind of a depressing view of a dystopian future, and I couldn't understand what the point of it was. Okay, best historical fiction is Claudius the God by Robert Graves. Sweden is also historical fiction, but the definition of historical fiction I use for this is when they take the historical record and just make it into a novel. So, for example, Claudius the God is, all the characters in there are real historical characters. All the events, or most of the events, are real historical events. He just takes the historical record and makes it into a novel. So those types of books are what I use for this category. There's no competition. This is the only book I read that fits this category this year. But even though this book wins by default, it really is a great historical fiction. And in fact, Robert Graves is one of the reasons I got into historical fiction in the first place, way back 25 years ago when I read I, Claudius as a high school student. I don't know why it took me 25 years to get around to reading the sequel to this book, but it's very rich historical detail, and Robert Graves is an excellent novelist. So what's not to like about this book? Well, what's not to like is it moves painfully slowly. But if you're willing to put in the time and the effort for it, you can learn a lot from this book. Okay, best nonfiction. Again, this one kind of wins by default. It's Bound for Glory by Woody Guthrie. It's a memoir, so, memoirs are nonfiction. Although, as I said in my original review of this, he seems to be mixing his memories with some fictionalized accounts. So it's, I don't know, partly nonfiction at least. It's an interesting book. It's very well told. Woody Guthrie has a way of creating very vivid scenes from his childhood. So, yeah, it's recommended. Okay, best book for professional development is Teaching Young Language Learners by Anna Maria Pinter. Now, I don't usually like to do worst book for professional development because books for professional development, they're not meant to be entertaining. You read them not for the entertainment value, you read them to get some professional development out of them. If they happen to be entertaining or well written, that's a bonus. So this book, Teaching Young Language Learners by Anna Maria Pinter, was well written and interesting. The other book I read, Syllabus Design by David Noonan, it was informative. I didn't particularly enjoy reading it, but it was very useful for Delta Module 3, which is why I read it in the first place. So I don't want to call it the worst book. I don't like to do worst books for professional development. Kind of anything you read is useful. And that's my list. So I'm going to try and do better next year. We'll see how many books are on this list this time next year. So I'm going to close out here.